The judge's gavel hit the wood, and the sound was loud in the very quiet room. Case 1142, Robert Foster versus Captain Sarah Foster. Charges of will forgery. I just stood where I was. The whole room seemed to turn and look at me. My father's voice cut right through the silence. There she is, the liar who tricked an old man for his money. He said it loud enough for the reporters in the front row to start scribbling it down. I didn't react. I'd learned over the years to stay calm under pressure, and a courtroom in my small hometown wasn't going to make me panic. The judge looked down at his papers and then back up at me, his brow wrinkled. He read my title from the file. Captain, then of what branch, Miss Foster? United States Air Force, Your Honor, assigned to Ramstein Air Base, Germany. I heard a few people in the back murmur. The judge nodded politely, but my father just rolled his eyes as if I had just claimed to be a movie star. That was the moment it really settled in. My own father had publicly sued me, accusing me of betraying the very man who had taught me everything I knew about honesty. All I could think was, Grandpa, you always said this would be hard. This whole mess had started a few months earlier, right after I got back home from my assignment in Germany. I had spent nearly 2 years at Ramstein, coordinating logistics for our forces in Europe. It wasn't exciting work. It was mostly long nights, bad instant coffee, and endless spreadsheets, but I felt good about it. I came home to Virginia hoping for a little rest, maybe a quiet family dinner that didn't turn into an argument about politics or my life choices. Instead, I walked right into a different kind of conflict. When I arrived at the family house, the air felt heavy, like something was wrong. My mom gave me a polite smile but didn't hug me. Mark, my older brother, barely looked up from his phone. And my dad, Robert Foster, a retired real estate agent who always acted like the king of the family, just gave me a stiff nod. We all gathered in the living room for what I thought was going to be a simple conversation about Grandpa's estate. He had passed away 6 months earlier while I was still overseas. We had spoken on the phone a week before he died, his voice weak but still clear. Sarah, he had said, I'm so proud of the woman you've become. You kept your word. What word, Grandpa? To serve, to be decent. He had coughed a little. That's worth more than any piece of land or bank account. So when the lawyer opened the folder that day and read that Grandpa had left everything to me, the house, the savings, the small patch of land up in Culpeper, my stomach just dropped. I felt guilty, not happy. I didn't even want it. But the look on my father's face froze me. He turned pale and then bright red. What kind of joke is this? He demanded. The lawyer adjusted his glasses. Sir, your father was very clear. He said his granddaughter served her country honorably, and she would take care of the property. Dad slammed his hand on the coffee table. And she wasn't even here when he died. She was off playing soldier, Mark smirked. Guess I picked the wrong job. Should have joined the Air Force, too. I tried to stay calm. Dad, I didn't ask for this. He sneered, Almatai. You think I believe that? You probably talked him into changing it before he died. Mom whispered, Robert, please. But he just stormed out, slamming the front door so hard the lawyer actually jumped. That night, I drove back to my small apartment feeling sick. I had always known my father didn't approve of my choices, joining the military instead of working in his real estate office, staying single, spending my 30s on bases instead of settling down. But this was something different. This felt like real hatred. A week later, a thick envelope arrived by certified mail. Inside was a subpoena. My father had filed a formal lawsuit, forgery of a will and manipulation of an elderly relative. The state of Virginia would hear the case. I remember sitting on the edge of my bed, the papers shaking in my hand. Me, a commissioned officer, being accused of cheating my own grandfather. I laughed, but it was a bitter sound. He really did it. Then I picked up my phone. Colonel Miller, I said when my superior officer answered. Sir, I'm going to need to take some personal leave. Is everything all right, Captain? My CO asked. I hesitated. Family matter, sir. I'll handle it properly. When the day of the hearing arrived, the courthouse was full. Dad stood by his lawyer, shoulders back, chin up, like he was about to accept an award. Mark whispered something to him, and they both chuckled. Mom sat in the back row by herself, looking down at her hands and twisting a handkerchief. I walked in through the side door. My uniform was pressed, my shoes were shined, and my ribbons were straight. I didn't wear it to impress anyone, but to remind myself who I was. The talking stopped. Even the judge paused what he was saying when he saw me. He looked down at the documents again, then leaned forward. Captain Foster, Ramstein Air Base. Yes, Your Honor. He let out a long breath. Interesting. Dad groaned loud enough for everyone to hear. Don't let that uniform fool you, Judge. She's always been a manipulator. The judge looked back and forth between us, his face impossible to read. Well, he said quietly, we'll find out soon enough who's fooling whom. The clerk called the first witness. As my father walked up to the stand, my heart rate slowed down. I didn't feel angry anymore. I just felt a deep, cold calm because I knew something he didn't. Grandpa had left me something much more powerful than money. A letter, sealed in his old leather journal, waiting in my bag. I hadn't shown it to anyone yet. I was waiting for the right time. That's the thing about the truth. People think it has to be loud and explosive, but sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it just walks in on polished shoes, wearing a uniform, and waits for its turn to speak. I didn't sleep at all that night after the first hearing. The courthouse was dark, but my mind kept playing my father's voice over and over. She fooled an old man for money. He had said it with such certainty you'd almost think I had confessed. I sat by my kitchen window, still in my service uniform, just looking at the folded flag in its display case on my wall. It was Grandpa's burial flag. I had, been the one to bring it home from the veterans' cemetery. The weight of that flag reminded me why I had to see this through. It wasn't for the inheritance or even just to clear my name. It was for the man who had taught me what integrity meant. When I was a kid, Grandpa used to say that honor doesn't start with a uniform, it starts at home. He'd tell me stories from his time in Korea while we built old model airplanes in his garage. He was never boastful about the medals he kept in a shadow box on his wall. He'd just tap the glass and say, "These aren't for being brave, Sarah. They're for doing what had to be done when nobody was watching." Dad never understood that. He thought honor was something you got by winning, a business deal, a title, a big bank account. He used to tell Mark, be a man who closes the sale. He told me, be someone's wife. But Grandpa, he told me, be someone you can respect in the mirror. I remember the last time we talked before I left for my assignment in Germany. He was sitting on his porch in that old plaid shirt of his. His hands were shaking from age, but his eyes were still as sharp as ever. He asked, "You nervous, kiddo?" I smiled a little. "A bit," he nodded. "Good. Courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about doing your duty, even when your knees are shaking." He took off his old ring, a simple gold band with an army insignia on it, and pressed it into my palm. "Don't let this family lose its way, Sarah. Your father. He's good at hiding his fear behind a lot of pride. Don't fight him with anger, just fight him with the truth." That ring is still on the chain with my dog tags. Sometimes during long nights on base, I'd hold it between my fingers and remember the sound of his voice. Growing up in my father's house was its own kind of basic training. He wasn't physically cruel. He never left bruises. He was cruel in a way that makes you doubt your own worth. When I got my acceptance letter to the Air Force Academy, he actually laughed. "Really? You'll last 2 weeks before you're crying and asking to come home." He told his friends at the golf club, "Nissin, she's just rebelling. She'll be back." I didn't go back. 4 years later, I graduated with honors. Grandpa was there, standing tall, even though he needed a cane to do it. Dad didn't come. He said he had a business commitment he couldn't get out of. That was the day Grandpa saluted me. A proud, shaky salute. I returned it, trying not to cry. He whispered, "The world will test your integrity, Sarah, especially when the test comes from your own family." I didn't really understand what he meant until now. The next morning after the hearing, Mom called. Her voice was thin, like she'd been crying but didn't want to admit it. Your father didn't sleep at all last night, she said. He's absolutely convinced you manipulated your grandfather. I sighed. Mom, you know me better than that. I do, she whispered. But he's always been jealous of how much his father loved you. That silence between us hurt more than any of the accusations. I finally said, You don't have to pick a side, Mom. She answered softly, Maybe I already did when I stayed quiet all these years. Later that week, I drove out to Grandpa's house. The very house that was at the center of this lawsuit. The air inside still smelled like cedar and old books. His army medals still hung on the wall, untouched. I walked through the rooms, running my hand over the furniture he had built himself. In his study, the old desk drawer stuck a little before it opened, and there it was, his leather journal. Inside were entries in his shaky handwriting. Most of it was just stories, memories, and thoughts. But one page stopped me cold. Robert's pride will be his curse. Mark's greed will be his downfall. But Sarah, she carries the name that still means something. She won't need to fight for this inheritance. It will fight for her. I closed the journal and just sat there for a long time, my eyes stinging. It was as if he'd written it knowing exactly what was going to happen. Outside, the flagpole creaked in the wind. For a second, I could almost hear his voice again. Don't let bitterness win, kiddo. Win by standing tall. That night, I called my commanding officer again. Sir, I said, I might have to testify in court next week. It's family. He paused. You're not the first officer whose toughest battles were at home, Foster. Do what you need to do, but keep your composure. That uniform doesn't stop being important at the courtroom door. I smiled a little. Understood, sir. As I hung up, I realized something. This wasn't just about a house or money. It was about proving that integrity wasn't just a word we put on plaques. It was something you lived, even when your own family was betting against you. I locked the journal in my briefcase that night. Tomorrow, I'd face my father again. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid of losing. Because win or lose, I already had the truth written in Grandpa's hand and carried in my heart. The courthouse in Culpeper sat on the same street as the diner where Grandpa and I used to get pancakes after church on Sundays. I'd always thought of that old red brick building as a symbol of justice, fair, steady, and reliable. That morning, as I stood in its shadow, it just looked smaller and colder than I remembered. Reporters were crowded on the steps, their cameras all pointed at the doors. My father loved that. He liked being the center of attention, especially when he could play the victim. He'd probably spent all night practicing his righteous anger face in the mirror. I arrived 10 minutes early, my uniform crisp, my hair pulled back in a tight bun. Every movement was careful. The Air Force taught me that even when things are falling apart, your posture stays straight. When I walked in, people turned to look. The courtroom went quiet, that weird hush that happens right before a storm. My father looked up, and there it was, the look I'd known my whole life. That dismissive half-smile that always said, "You're still nothing to me." Mark leaned in to whisper something to him, and they both chuckled. I took my seat at the defense table next to Mr. Henderson, a lawyer who had retired from the JAG Corps. He wasn't flashy, just the kind of man who believed in quiet facts. "Stay calm, Captain," he murmured. "The truth always finds its way out." The judge, a tall man with gray hair and steady eyes, came in. "All rise," the bailiff called out. The second the judge sat down, my father's lawyer, Mr. Davies, was on his feet. "Your Honor, we are here because my client's late father, a respected veteran, was manipulated by his granddaughter. She convinced him to sign over his assets while she was stationed overseas." The judge adjusted his glasses. "Manipulated from Germany, Mr. Davies?" Mr. Davies smirked. "Technology, Your Honor. Digital signatures, remote notaries. She had all the access." I sat perfectly still. My father nodded along, arms crossed. "She was always good with computers, even as a kid." The judge's eyes moved to me. Captain Foster, I see you were stationed at Ramstein. Yes, Your Honor, Cybersecurity Division. That got a few raised eyebrows. He nodded slowly. That's quite a responsible position. My father scoffed. She likes to make herself sound important. She probably just printed that title off the internet. The courtroom laughed a little. I didn't even blink. Mr. Foster, the judge said, his voice suddenly sharp, I'll remind you this is a court of law, not a family dinner. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. They called their first witness, a neighbor named Ms. Gable, who had known Grandpa for 30 years. She nervously twisted her purse strap as she testified. Well, Arthur always talked about leaving things to Sarah, but I don't know if he really meant it. Mr. Davies jumped on that. So you believe the change to the will might have been influenced? Mrs. Gable hesitated. Well, Robert always said Sarah could be very persuasive. Persuasive, Davies repeated like the word was an admission of guilt. I kept my face blank. Grandpa once told me, don't argue with gossip, Sarah. It just drowns itself in silence. Next was the notary's clerk, who said she had received scanned documents from Grandpa's lawyer's office, confirming a signature from his hospital bed, all notarized legally. Mr. Davies waved the papers around dramatically. Ladies and gentlemen, how convenient, isn't it? A perfect digital trail leading right back to Captain Foster's military-issued laptop. I looked at my lawyer, Mr. Henderson, and he gave me a very small nod. Let them build their tower of lies, his look seemed to say. We'll just pull out the one brick that matters. During the recess, I saw my mother outside the courtroom doors. She was sitting alone on a bench, holding her Bible, her hands shaking. When she saw me, she whispered, He's not the man he used to be, Sarah. I wanted to hug her, but there were too many people watching. Mom, I said quietly, you don't have to defend him anymore. Tears welled up in her eyes. I know, I just wish he could see you the way your grandfather did. Before I could say anything else, the bailiff called us back inside. When we got back to our seats, the judge leaned forward. I've reviewed the service record and verifications submitted by the defense, he said. Captain Foster, you were in Germany on the date of this notarization. Yes, sir. With 24-hour secured access logs and clearance credentials verifying your presence on base. Yes, sir. He looked up, seeming genuinely curious. Are you saying it would have been impossible for you to forge these documents? I met his gaze. Not impossible, Your Honor. Just dishonorable. And I don't do dishonorable. The courtroom went quiet. Even my father stopped smirking. The judge's expression softened just a little. I see. Then he looked at my father. Mr. Foster, your accusation is a serious one. If it's proven false, it borders on defamation and abuse of the legal process. My father leaned back, scoffing. Oh, come on. She's not some hero. She's... Enough, the judge said. His tone cut through the air. When the session ended for the day, my father pushed past me in the hallway. Enjoy your little performance, he hissed. That uniform won't save you when the truth comes out. I looked him right in the eye. The truth already did. He walked away, shoulders stiff, still holding on to his pride like it was a life raft. Outside, the air smelled like rain. Reporters shouted questions at me. I didn't answer any of them. I just stood on the courthouse steps, looking at the flag fluttering in the gray sky. Grandpa used to say, the flag doesn't wave for the person who's right. It waves for the person who's honest. For the first time in weeks, I felt a little peace in that thought. But I knew this wasn't over. Tomorrow, the rest of the evidence would speak. And when it did, no amount of pride could silence it. I arrived early the next morning, long before anyone else. The courthouse lights were still dim, and a janitor was mopping the hall. I walked past him quietly, my steps echoing on the marble floor. There was something peaceful about being there, before all the noise, like a soldier walking a perimeter before dawn. In the courtroom, I put my folder on the table. It was a standard-issue blue folder with an Air Force emblem on it. Inside were my service logs, my clearance records, and a sealed letter from my commanding officer. Everything was in order, perfectly organized. I'd spent my career building a life around precision. Now, that discipline was my only defense. When my lawyer, Mr. Henderson, arrived, he gave me a slow nod. "Ready?" "As I'll ever be," I breathed. He smiled a little. "You sound like a pilot before a storm." "I've been through storms, sir," I said. "Well, this one's just more personal." The courtroom filled up fast. Spectators, reporters, and even a few older veterans who had served with Grandpa. I recognized their faces from the local VFW, weathered and patient. They didn't say anything, but just seeing them there meant a lot. Dad arrived late with his lawyer at his side. He wore the same expensive suit, the same smug look. Mark followed him dressed like he was walking into a business meeting instead of a family trial. Mom sat in the back again, her eyes red, holding the same handkerchief. The judge entered and we all stood. "This court is now in session." Mr. Davies, my father's lawyer, started first. He gave a long, dramatic speech about digital tampering, unauthorized access, and family betrayal. His words were smooth and polished, the kind that sound very convincing if you don't really know how computers or people actually work. Then he presented his big piece of evidence, a stack of printed screenshots, supposedly showing emails between me and Grandpa's attorney, where I was requesting urgent changes to the will. He held them up high for the cameras. "Your Honor, I rest my case." The judge turned to me. "Captain Foster, do you have a response?" I stood up. "Yes, Your Honor. With your permission, I'd like to submit my verified base clearance logs and digital access reports from the week those alleged emails were sent." The bailiff took the folder to the judge. The judge opened it, reading the pages with a frown. "These documents show," I said calmly, that from March 3rd to March 9th, the time of the supposed emails, I was physically inside a secure compartmented information facility, or SESCIF, at Ramstein. There is no external internet access. Every time I entered or left was logged by a biometric scan. I could no more have sent those emails from in there than I could have walked through a locked vault. Mr. Davies started to object, but the judge silenced him with a look. He turned back to me. "You're saying you had no way to alter these documents?" "I'm saying, Your Honor, that my entire life is built on integrity and verification. My security clearance requires it. If I had forged those records, I would have lost my commission, my clearance, and, my honor. I still have all three." The judge nodded slowly, then my lawyer stood up. "See? Your Honor, the defense would like to call a witness, retired Sergeant Paul Peterson." The door at the back opened, and an older man in a suit walked in, using a cane. My heart jumped. Peterson had been Grandpa's friend for decades. He was also the notary who had witnessed the will. When he got to the stand, his voice was steady. "Your Honor, I notarized that will myself for my friend Arthur. He was of sound mind, fully aware, and very clear about what he wanted." "What did he say about his decision?" the judge asked. "He said, and I'm quoting here, 'The girl earned it. She lives by the code I tried to teach my son, but he never learned.'" The courtroom went completely silent. Even Dad stopped moving. The judge turned toward my father. "Mr. Foster, did you know Mr. Peterson was the notary and a longtime friend of your father's?" Dad's jaw got tight. We hadn't spoken in years. "Why not?" he shrugged. He always took her side. The judge pressed him. "Because she served or because she respected your father's service?" My father didn't answer. I sat back down. My heartbeat was steady now, not from anger, but from a sense of clarity. Grandpa's words were in my head. "Win by standing tall." The judge cleared his throat. "Captain Foster, your military documents will be entered into evidence. Mr. Peterson's testimony confirms both the authenticity of the will and your grandfather's intent." Unless the plaintiff has any new evidence, I see no further basis for this case. Mr. Davies stammered, "Your Honor, we request a recess." "Denied," the judge said. His tone made it clear the discussion was over. He looked down at me. "Captain Foster, I want to commend your composure. This court rarely sees this kind of discipline." "Thank you, Your Honor," I said quietly. Then he turned to my father. "Mr. Foster, accusing a decorated service member and your own daughter of fraud is a very grave act. This isn't just a civil dispute. It's a moral one." Dad shifted in his seat. He wouldn't look at me. When court adjourned for the day, the reporters flooded the hallway. "Captain Foster, do you plan to press charges against your father for defamation? Was the estate meant to honor veterans?" I ignored all of them. Outside that the wind had picked up, the courthouse flag was whipping sharply against its pole. I stopped and saluted it, not out of pride, but just out of gratitude. Mom appeared behind me. "You didn't have to go through all this," she whispered. I turned. "Yes, I did. Not for me. For him." She nodded, tears spilling over. "He would be so proud of you." As she walked away, I saw my father standing by his car. He looked smaller somehow. Not older, just less. He caught my eye, then quickly turned away without a word. I didn't follow him. Some truths don't need to be shouted. They just need to be seen in the light. That night, I placed Grandpa's ring on my nightstand and whispered, "You taught me right, old man. I didn't need to fight. I just needed to stand." And for the first time in months, I slept soundly. The next morning, the courthouse felt different. The whispers were gone, replaced by a tense silence. Like everyone already knew which way the wind was blowing. The reporters didn't shout questions when I walked up the steps. Some of them even nodded, almost respectfully. Inside, my father sat at his table, arms crossed, his face like stone. Mark was nowhere to be seen. He was probably avoiding the cameras now that things weren't going his way. Mom sat in the same spot as always, clutching her handkerchief. She gave me a small nod. When the judge entered, we all stood. "Captain Foster," the judge said, "I have reviewed all the evidence, the logs, and the testimony. However, before this court delivers its verdict, I would like to hear from both parties directly." He looked at my father first. "Mr. Foster, you may speak." Dad stood up slowly, buttoning his suit jacket. "Your Honor, I just want to say I did what any son would do. I protected what my father built. Sarah, she was always different. Always thought she knew better." He turned to look at me, his eyes sharp. "She walked away from this family, joined the military, buried herself in a world that doesn't care about family. And my father loved her for it, loved her more than his own son." His voice cracked a little, but he tried to hide it. "And now she comes home, and she gets everything, while Mark and I are left with nothing." The judge watched him. "So your accusation was motivated by a sense of fairness?" Dad hesitated. "By justice?" The judge's tone hardened. "Justice is based on truth, Mr. Foster, not on resentment." Dad's jaw tightened. "Maybe, but I know what I saw. My father was frail. He would never have made those changes without someone pushing him." That was my cue. I stood up slowly. "Permission to speak, Your Honor?" "Granted." I walked forward just enough to meet my father's eyes. "Dad," I began, my voice quiet. "You keep saying Grandpa was weak, but the truth is he was stronger than any of us. You just never saw it because you were too busy trying to be the one in charge." He opened his mouth to interrupt, but I kept going. "You told me once that joining the Air Force was a waste of my life, that no daughter of yours should salute anyone. But you never understood. I didn't join to serve a uniform. I joined to serve the values Grandpa taught us: honor, courage, and commitment. The same values you used to make fun of when I was a kid. The room was so quiet I could hear a pen drop in the back row. Grandpa left me the estate because he knew I would take care of it. Not for me, but for what it represents. You talk about legacy. Dad, legacy isn't money. It's how people remember your name. For a long moment, my father just stared at me. Then he muttered, "You think wearing that uniform makes you better than us?" I shook my head. No, it just reminds me to be better than I was yesterday. The judge leaned back, looking between us. "Captain Foster," he said softly, "would you like to submit your closing statement?" "Yes, Your Honor." I faced the room, not to put on a show, but just to tell the truth one last time. I didn't come here to fight over land or money. I came here because someone I loved was accused of being a fool, and because the person who accused him forgot who raised him. I took a breath. My grandfather believed in service over status. He believed in lifting people up, not tearing them down. He taught me that honor isn't something you inherit, it's something you earn every single day. So if defending that makes me the villain in my father's eyes, then I'll accept that. I turned back to my father. "But Dad, I'm not here to humiliate you. I'm here to forgive you, even before the verdict, because I know what pride does to a person. It eats you from the inside out, until all that's left is the echo of what could have been." My voice caught just for a second, but I kept it steady. "You once told me I'd never understand what it means to be a foster. You were right. Because the foster name isn't something I just had to inherit. It's something I had to rebuild." The judge nodded, clearly moved. "Thank you, Captain Foster. That will be all." After a brief pause, the courtroom stirred. My father stood, visibly shaking now, the first real crack in his tough exterior. "You think you're so noble," he said quietly. "Standing there, pretending you're the only one who ever did anything right. You left this family. You left me." I met his gaze, my own expression softening. "I didn't leave, Dad. You closed the door behind me." He froze, his eyes darting away. Then, before anyone could react, he said so quietly I almost didn't hear it, I just wanted him to love me like he loved you." That broke something in me. All the anger and resentment I'd been holding, but it just faded. For the first time, I wasn't looking at my accuser. I was looking at a man who was still trapped in his own father's shadow. The judge cleared his throat, his voice steady again. "This court finds in favor of the defendant, Captain Sarah Foster. All charges are dismissed." There were gasps, whispers, and the faint click of cameras. He continued, "Furthermore, this court acknowledges that the plaintiff's actions were driven not by evidence, but by emotion. This case will serve as a reminder that pride, when left unchecked, destroys far more than it protects." The gavel struck, one last final time. Dad slumped a little in his chair. Mom started to cry quietly. I didn't feel like I had won, I just felt relieved. As I left the courtroom, one of the old veterans stopped me at the door. His hand was rough when he shook mine. "Your grandfather would have been proud today," he said. I smiled a little. He always said honor is loudest when it whispers. The old man nodded. "Then you shouted today, kid." I walked outside into the sunlight. The courthouse steps felt bright under my feet. Behind me, my father didn't follow, but for the first time, I hoped that someday he might. The news spread faster than I thought it would. By the time I got back to my apartment that evening, my phone was buzzing with messages from reporters, old classmates, and even people from my base in Germany. The headlines were already online. Air Force officer cleared in family inheritance case. Veteran's granddaughter wins forgery suit. Judge praises officer's integrity. I turned off the TV. I didn't need validation from strangers. The real victory wasn't the verdict. It was reclaiming the truth about Grandpa and maybe a little bit about myself. Still, there was a strange, heavy feeling inside me. Winning a legal battle doesn't mean the war inside you is over. A few days later, I got a letter from the courthouse. The judge himself had written it by hand. It was just a few lines on his official stationery. Captain Foster, thank you for reminding this court that truth and honor still matter. Judge Whitmore. I read it twice, then put it inside Grandpa's old leather journal, between his notes about courage and forgiveness. Mom called that night. He's not talking much, she said softly. Your father. He's just been in the garage since the trial ended. I hesitated. Is he angry? No, she whispered. He's embarrassed. And lonely. I sat there, phone pressed to my ear, trying to decide if I should be angry or compassionate. After a long silence, I said, Mom, tell him I don't hate him. Tell him I just hope he remembers who taught us both what honor meant. She sighed, her voice trembling. He heard that, honey. He's sitting right here. There was a quiet sound, then nothing but static. For a second, I thought he'd hung up. Then I heard his voice. Kid, he said. It was so soft. He hadn't called me that in years. I made a fool of myself, didn't I? I swallowed hard. I mean, you made a mistake, Dad. But you're still my dad. He let out a slow, shaky laugh. You sound just like your grandfather. That's the best compliment I could ever get, I said. The next week, I went to the cemetery. It was a clear Virginia morning, the kind Grandpa loved. The trees were quiet above the rows of white headstones, and the air smelled like pine. I knelt beside his grave, brushing some leaves off the bronze marker. Hey, old man, I murmured. You were right. The truth found its way home. I laid the judge's note beside his name. I didn't shout, I didn't fight, I just stood tall like you said. A breeze moved through the trees. It almost felt like a reply, that quiet nod of approval he used to give me when I got something right without needing his words. Back in town, life started to feel normal again. I resumed my reserve duties and started volunteering at the local Veterans Outreach Center, helping younger soldiers learn how to transition back to civilian life. Most of them were just kids in their early 20s, not sure who they were without a uniform. One of them, a quiet Army vet named Alex, asked me once, Ma'am, how do you deal with people, not believing in you? I smiled. You don't. You just believe in yourself until the truth catches up. He nodded slowly. Even if it's family? Especially then, I said. Because family isn't supposed to be about being right. It's supposed to be about doing right. A month after the verdict, Mom invited me over for Sunday dinner. It was the first time I'd been back to that house since the will reading. It was the same dining table, the same chairs, but the air felt different, lighter. When I walked in, Dad was there. He looked smaller, quieter, humbled. His hair seemed grayer, his voice softer. I wasn't sure you'd come, he said. Neither was I replied honestly. We ate mostly in silence, just the sound of forks and knives. Then he put his fork down. I read Grandpa's journal. My heart stopped for a second. You did? He nodded. Your mother found it after the trial. The old man, he wrote about me. About how he wished I'd learned humility before it was too late. He took a deep breath. I think I finally understand what he meant. I didn't say anything. Sometimes silence is the only right answer. He continued, I don't expect you to forgive me, Sarah. I just wanted you to know. I'm proud of you. For standing up for him. For us, even for me. For the first time in my entire life, his eyes softened. It wasn't the cold, dismissive look I'd known forever. It was genuine. The kind of look a father gives his daughter when he finally, really sees her. I nodded, my throat tight. That means a lot, Dad. He smiled, just barely. You look like him, Same eyes, same stubbornness. I laughed softly. I guess it skipped a generation. After dinner, I walked with him out to the porch. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object. It was Grandpa's army ring. "I think this belongs to you," he said. I froze. "You kept it?" He nodded. "He wanted you to have it. I just wasn't ready to let it go. Until now." I took it from him carefully. The gold was warm from his hand. "Thanks, Dad," I whispered. He looked at me, his voice quiet. "You've carried the name better than I ever did." We stood there for a long time, not saying anything. The crickets were humming, and somewhere in the distance, church bells rang. For once, it wasn't an uncomfortable silence. It was just peace. Later that night, as I drove home, I passed the courthouse. The flag outside was lit up by the streetlights, bright and steady against the night sky. I pulled over for a minute and rolled down the window. The stars over Virginia looked exactly like the ones I'd seen over Germany. Distant, constant, and real. I whispered into the quiet air, honor, courage, commitment. And somewhere deep inside, I knew I hadn't just won a case. I'd healed something that generations of my family had left broken. Because forgiveness, when it finally comes, isn't a weakness. It's proof that love is stronger than pride. A few weeks after that dinner, life really began to quiet down. The reporters stopped calling, the courthouse gossip moved on, and the small Virginia town that once whispered my name went back to talking about high school football and the weather. I went back to my volunteer work at the Veterans Center. I didn't need a job, but it gave me a sense of peace. Helping other people put their lives back together reminded me that every soldier fights two wars, one on the battlefield and one inside their own head. Most mornings, I'd get there early, make the coffee, and set out the chairs for the group meetings. The walls were covered in photos of veterans, young faces that looked old from their service, with eyes that knew too much but still carried hope. Sometimes I'd look at them and wonder if Grandpa's face would have fit right in with those quiet heroes. One morning, a package arrived at my apartment. It was small, wrapped in brown paper with no return address. Inside, I found an envelope from Grandpa's lawyer. It was marked, "To be delivered upon verification of death. Foster Arthur J." It was Grandpa's handwriting. My hands shook a little as I opened it. Inside was a single folded letter. Tucked beside it was a pressed four-leaf clover, his old lucky charm from his wallet. "Sarah, if you're reading this, it means you came home and did what needed to be done. Don't let bitterness win. When you fight for the truth, do it with grace. When you fight for family, do it with patience. And when you forgive, really forgive, do it for yourself, not for them. The foster name isn't about wealth or blood. It's about honor that survives misunderstanding. I know your father's pride will blind him for a while, but one day he'll look at you and see what I always did. The heart that carries us all. Love, Grandpa." I read it twice before the tears came. It wasn't just the words that got to me. It was that he still saw the goodness in all of us, even after everything he must have known would happen. I folded the letter carefully and put it inside the journal where all his wisdom lived. Then I slipped the ring, his army ring, onto the chain around my neck. For the first time, the weight of it felt gentle, not heavy. A week later, I got a call from Mom. "Your father wants to see you," she said softly. I hesitated, looking at the stack of case files on my desk. "Is he okay?" "He's different," she said. "You'll see." That Sunday, I drove out to the family house. The driveway looked the same. The white porch railing was still chipped from years of neglect, but the man waiting on the steps wasn't the same father who had dragged me into court. He stood there in jeans and an old plaid shirt, holding a small wooden box. His shoulders seemed smaller, as if all that pride had finally let go of him. "Hey, kid," he said quietly. "Hey, Dad." He handed me the box. "I've been cleaning out the garage. I found something that belonged to your grandfather." Inside was a folded American flag. It was the one from Grandpa's funeral. "I thought you had this," I said, confused. He shook his head. "I kept it. I couldn't let go of it. Not until now. I thought maybe I didn't deserve to." I placed my hand on the folded cloth. "We all made mistakes, Dad." He looked at me for a long time. Yeah, but you fixed them. You did it the right way with your head high. I tried to protect what I thought was mine. It turns out what was mine was never the land. It was supposed to be you. Those words hit me harder than any courtroom verdict ever could. I'm proud of you, Sarah, he said, and I'm sorry. Not just for the lawsuit, for all the years I made you feel small. I blinked, fast, but the tears came anyway. Apology accepted, Dad. He chuckled, a soft, dry sound. You sound like a judge. I guess it runs in the family now. We both laughed. It was awkward at first, and then it was easy. For the first time, the air between us wasn't full of tension. It was just full of peace. Later, before I left, I walked into Grandpa's old study. Dust was dancing in the light coming through the window. His model airplanes were still lined up on the shelves, and the smell of old books hadn't faded. I stood there for a minute, imagining him sitting at his desk, pipe in hand, probably smiling at how things had turned out. I did it, Grandpa, I whispered. Not with anger, with grace. As I turned to leave, I noticed something new on the wall. The framed verdict from the court was hanging neatly right next to Grandpa's medals. Under it, Dad had added a small brass plaque. In honor of truth and service, may we all stand a little taller. I smiled. Sometimes redemption doesn't show up with trumpets and applause. Sometimes it just hangs quietly on a wall, waiting to be seen. That night, I drove home along the same road I used to take as a teenager, back when I dreamed of escaping this town. The sunset was stretched out over the fields, warm and golden, painting the whole world in forgiveness. I thought about everything that had happened, the accusations, the humiliation, the courtroom silence, and finally, the peace that came after. It hit me then that revenge was never the goal. It was about restoring balance, dignity, and faith. Not just for me, but for everyone who had gotten lost in the noise of pride and misunderstanding. Forgiveness isn't about forgetting. It's about remembering, but not letting it poison you. Before I went to bed, I recorded one last entry in my audio log, something I started doing during my service in Germany, just to process my thoughts. My voice was calm and steady, but it was full of something new. Hope. If you're listening to this, I said, remember that revenge is easy, but redemption takes strength. I learned that real honor doesn't come from medals or titles. It comes from choosing grace when you could choose anger. And if someone you love betrays you, you don't let their actions define your heart. You let your integrity define theirs. Because when you stand up for what's right, quietly and humbly, the world eventually takes notice. Even the people who once turned away. I paused, then smiled. This story isn't about who won or who lost. It's about who learned. And maybe that's the real victory. So if you've ever been wronged, if someone doubted your worth or tried to bury your truth, remember this. You don't need to raise your voice to be heard. You just have to keep standing tall. And when life tests your honor, you salute it, you forgive it, and you keep walking forward. I stopped the recording. Thank you for listening. If this story moved you, share it. Not for me, but for the lesson that still matters in this world: honor, courage, and forgiveness.